It was midnight, and I was alone in the library. The exams were approaching, and I usually preferred to study at night. Everyone else was at home. I wasn't talking to anyone, and I was completely focused on my studies. That night was the same, but something felt different. It was so quiet that it felt like only I and that one man were left in the library. At first, I didn't notice, but then somehow I started to feel like he was constantly watching me. After a while, it started to catch my attention. He was sitting at the desk right in front of me, and he was staring at me all the time. At first, I thought, I must be distracted, but he was staring so persistently that it became impossible not to notice. I got a little anxious. But what could I do? There was no one else in the library. Maybe he just wanted to distract me, I thought. I continued studying for a while, but I couldn't concentrate. I could feel his eyes on me. I kept raising my head every few minutes to look at him. He was still there, still staring at me. At that moment, I began to realize how strange the situation was. Something was wrong. I couldn't focus, and this was making me more nervous. My heart began to race. I was so scared that my hands started to tremble. I quickly started gathering my things, stuffing them into my bag, my hands still shaking. While I tried to avoid looking at him, I glanced at the exit door and thought about how I could leave. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake off that terrifying feeling. I started walking quickly. My breath was quickening. My head was spinning. I just wanted to get out of there and go home. But I heard a sound behind me. Soft footsteps, coming up quickly. I was so terrified that I couldn't even look back. My steps quickened. I exited the library, turned around quickly, but there was no one. I took a deep breath and felt a little relieved. But even then, the fear was still with me. It felt like someone was still watching me. I walked quickly, my heart still pounding wildly. My steps continued relentlessly, without a moment's pause. I reached the metro. Thankfully, the metro wasn't completely empty. This brought me great relief. I sat down and started waiting for it to arrive. I wanted to lift my head and look around. At that moment, my eyes froze for a second. My posture faltered briefly. The metro's lights were surrounded by reflections from afar, and my eyes caught sight of a figure. That man was standing on the opposite platform, on the other side of the metro tracks. Slowly, he was staring at me. His eyes gleamed even in the darkness. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. But then, everything became clear. He was still after me. My heart started pounding as if it would burst out of my chest. I was so scared that I quickly turned my head, holding my breath. I tried to focus on the faces of the other passengers, but nothing was normal. There was only that man, his eyes still fixed on me. For a moment, my entire body froze. It wasn't just my hands trembling, my whole body was shaking. I boarded the metro. The man stayed at the station, or so I thought. When I got on the metro, I thought I had escaped him. I felt a great sense of relief. Finally, I got off the metro. I walked so fast that people passing by gave me strange looks, but I didn't see them. All I wanted was to get home as soon as possible. I walked swiftly, passing through narrow streets without turning my head side to side, focusing solely on my destination. When I reached home, I quickly opened the door and stepped inside. I hastily locked the door and pulled the bolts shut. For a while, I stood there, out of breath, walking around the house, checking every corner. I was so anxious that if I heard any noise, I would immediately panic and look around. But everything was silent. There was only the solitude of the house. At that moment, even though I was at home, my fear didn't fully fade. I called my friend and started telling them what had happened when I heard something fall in the yard. I leaned out the window and looked outside, and there he was. My blood ran cold. I told my friend he was here and asked them to come quickly. I dialed 911. I heard the sound of the door handle. He was trying to get into my house. 911 told me to stay on the line and said the team was on their way. I was so scared. I could barely understand what 911 was saying through my tears. They asked if all the locks were secure. I told them they were. The sound of the door handle grew louder with each passing second, echoing in my ears. I stared at the phone, shaking. They had told me the team was on their way, but I didn't know how long it would take. The rhythm of the knocking grew faster. It was as if he was determined to get in. My heart was racing. My mind was clouded. Suddenly, there was a loud bang at the door, and then silence. I thought he couldn't open it. I told 911 that he had stopped knocking, but when I heard footsteps inside my house, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. He had gotten inside. The door shook as if it was about to break off. I backed away in panic, with no other exit. I was so alone that my only hope was that the team would arrive in time. But the sound of the knocking only made my fear grow stronger with every passing second. The door was hit again, and when it suddenly opened, I saw his terrifying face. I didn't even think for a second. Instinctively, I stepped back, but the room was too small. I didn't know where to go. He rushed inside, and I stumbled back, not knowing what to do. Then, with a sharp move, he pushed me and slammed me into the wall. It was so forceful that my head spun for a moment. With a violent movement, he shoved me toward the mirror. The cracking sound of the mirror echoed in my ears. I had a horrible ringing in my head. After a moment of disorientation, the mirror's glass shattered, and the pieces fell to the ground with a loud crash. My hand, my foot, everything was cut. I fell onto the broken glass, and when I tried to use my hand to support myself, the shards pierced my palm. I grabbed a piece of the broken glass and held it tight. He grabbed me and threw me onto the bed. I was crying. He climbed on top of me and started kissing my neck. He held my hands, so I couldn't defend myself. When he shifted slightly, my foot became exposed, and I managed to kick him. He was thrown back and had to let go of my hand. I quickly recovered, but I was so close to him that I could feel his cold body. I grabbed the glass shard and swung it toward his face. The glass pierced his eyes and face, forcing him to pull back for a moment. But his scream was so wild that my body started trembling with fear again. He became furious. He quickly reached into his pocket, but before he could do anything, I swung again. This time, the glass shard embedded itself in a different part of his body. He slowly sank to the ground, but he was so strong that he still looked at me as if he wanted to punish me. A minute or two later, I started hearing sirens. The team had arrived. When the police came, I couldn't tear my eyes away from his lifeless body. I was crying so hard that my eyes were swollen and hurting. When the police came in, they took me outside. A crowd of people had gathered around, staring at me. When the police took me out, everything suddenly became strangely calm. The crowd around me looked at me with astonished faces, but I couldn't feel anything. My emotions had disappeared. I was so exhausted that I didn't know what I was doing or thinking. There was only one thing. That man, that fear, those terrifying moments. They were now behind me, that the emptiness inside me remained. I took a slow step, my vision blurry, my heart still pounding in my chest. That fear, with its marks, would stay with me forever.